What's going on, everybody? You found Bottom Tier Collector. I'm your host, the Bearded One. As always, thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting on my content. It's always much appreciated. First things first, I apologize for the AC noise you may or may not hear in the background. It largely sounds like white noise, but it is there. I know it's there, and it bothers me, so I know it probably bothers you, the viewer, and I apologize for that. However, this being the second story in my house, and we don't come up here very often. We keep it really cold in the wintertime, and so now that I'm up here filming, I got to turn that heat up so I can film. So again, apologize for the air. I hope you'll bear through it and get through this video with me. All right, now let's get that out of the way. We are now talking about the half-point check-in with Fourth World. It's a massive story, and I think a halfway point is a little appropriate. For those of you brand new people out there, I don't imagine many people that watch this channel are brand new collectors, but just in case somebody's brand new or doesn't know anything about Jack Kirby, Jack Kirby was probably the biggest comic book creator from the Golden Age to the Silver Age and into the Bronze Age. He's largely known as the King of Comics, and he's not necessarily known as the King of Comics because he was the GOAT artist or the GOAT writer. You know, that's all subjective opinion, who the best writer of all time is or the best artist of all time is. But when it comes to Jack Kirby, what he was the king of is what he just oversaw so many stories, and nobody had output like Jack Kirby. Nobody could release the amount of comic books in a week, in a month, that Jack Kirby did. And so that's what Jack Kirby, in my opinion, when I think of him being the king of comics, is largely the king of. You know, he just had so much influence everywhere in comics for decades. Fourth World is his magnus opus. Now, this is all speculation. I don't know that I know this stuff. I don't know if Jack Kirby's ever talked about this stuff out loud. I'm sure he's told this story to someone out loud, somewhere out there, or it wouldn't be in the ether. But story goes, Jack Kirby had another falling out with Stan Lee at Marvel. He had been mulling over this Fourth World material that he was going to write for Marvel and give Marvel. And because of this falling out, he marched over to DC and gave DC all of his Fourth World material. So Marvel missed out on having Darkseid and Orion and Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, all these iconic characters for DC, because Jack Kirby went over to DC instead of Marvel. And then I think Jack Kirby was pushing to become an editor-in-chief. He wanted to be the man at DC, which makes sense. He's Jack freaking Kirby. He's the man in comics, and still was at the 70s. At the time this was coming out, his name had clout. You know, still he wasn't a has-been at this point in his career. And then DC kind of played him off, kind of shrugged him off. They didn't appreciate him. They didn't value him. They made him do this book called The Demon, which I love. The Demon. Rest in peace, Jack Kirby. Love The Demon. But I don't think Jack Kirby is fond of that character. I think he hates the Demon. Hated the Demon. He's not alive anymore. And they forced him to write that book. And he did OMAC. I don't know the story of OMAC, whether he came up with OMAC on his own and liked OMAC, or I don't know what became of OMAC. I think he did a Commandy book, The Last Neanderthal, or whatever. Commandy is the last human alive, or something. I can't remember what that moniker is. But yeah, Jack Kirby did other stuff besides Fourth World. He was pushing to become editor-in-chief, and it just kind of fizzled out. And he said, you know what, DC's just too corporate for me. I can't move up the ladder like I want to. I'm going back to Marvel. And then hence the Eternals. From what I've heard in the community, Eternals is the remains of Fourth World. I'm only halfway through the book. Obviously, I've got my little bookmark here. But I heard Fourth World is a little incomplete, and then Eternals is just kind of the ashes of Fourth World. It's not even great value Fourth World. It's just, the ending to his story, I think, but marvelized. So yeah, that's some backstory on Fourth World. Diving into the story, this story is so 70s, and it's really why it's taken me so long to get through it. There are parts of Fourth World that I love. Specifically, the New Gods. The New Gods series is some of the best comic book. Well, I don't want to say every single issue of New Gods, but the premise of the New Gods and the backstory with the battle between Apocalypse, Darkseid's home planet, and the New Gods, the High Father and Light Ray. Light Ray is a fan favorite of mine. I like Light Ray. It's pretty much a god that can travel faster than the speed of light, I believe. And then there's Black Racer, the god of death. New Gods is the most interesting run of Fourth World. And before I get even deeper, Fourth World consists of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and the Forever People. Those are the 4 books that make up the epic of Fourth World, and they I really don't think they have to be read simultaneously. I mean, not simultaneously, in release date, in that order. That's how this book was organized in release date as Jack Kirby was releasing them. And just for me and my personality, I prefer that. I like that. However, how the story reads, it's still very 70s. Each title still feels a little contained. And so because of that, I don't think you necessarily need to read. You need to read it in release date order to understand the story. I think you could read Superman's pals, Jimmy Olsen, all the way through, New Gods all the way through, Mr. Miracle all the way through, and Forever People all the way through, and at least to the halfway point. I don't know if we're going to start getting things more intertwined, but there's not too much crossover. Now in the beginning, we're introduced to Jimmy Olsen and the Newsboy Legion. Jimmy Olsen is the leader of a gang at the very beginning, which is very odd. He's the leader of a gang, and they're going... Something about they're going to track down the Mountain of Judgment, I think it's called, which turns out to be, Superman becomes involved. He's tracking Jimmy Olsen, meets up with Jimmy Olsen, discovers he's the leader of the gang and all that. And so Superman is somewhat involved in Fourth World. DC probably forced Jack Kirby. I get the sense DC possibly forced Superman onto Jack Kirby so they could, have a flagship character in this mega story. Because most of this story is all original content, all new characters. I don't even think it was supposed to be part of the DC universe. However, we're given Jimmy Olsen and Superman and the Newsboy Legion. And so when they get to the Mountain of Judgment, going back to the premise of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, they find the Harrys, and they discover that these group of people, they're really small, humanoid-like creatures called the Harrys. They're from a place called New Genesis, and we learn that the Mountain of Judgment is actually a moving train, I think with weapons and stuff on it. And they're always on the move because they're on the run from, I think it's either Mordecai, who is a disciple of or not Mordecai, Mercari. Mercari, who's a disciple of Darkseid or Darkseid himself. But they're on the move from the forces of Apocalypse. We'll just say that. It's been a while. I'm trying to remember everything. And then once we kind of are introduced to the idea of New Genesis, then we get into the New Gods stuff, and we are introduced to the battle of New Genesis and Apocalypse and Highfather, who's kind of like the Zeus of the DC universe. He's in, a kind of like a ceasefire. He's got a treaty, a very fragile treaty with Apocalypse and their leader, Darkseid. I believe Darkseid is a new god. However, I only know that because I was born in 1989, 30 years after, 20 years, roughly, after Fourth World started. So I've got all this extra material now. But back then, if I had been born back then and been reading this at the time it's coming out, I would have known Darkseid is a new god. But yeah, I think Darkseid's a new god that broke off. And I love that new god stuff. It feels like a Greek epic. It's just so awesome to learn about Orion, who right now at this point I already know the origin story of Orion and Mr. Miracle, but for the sake of this video, not to spoil anything, Orion being the son of Highfather and Mr. Miracle being a slave on Apocalypse. And then that's where the Mr. Miracle stuff comes in. Mr. Miracle largely just focuses on Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. Big Barda is a part of a female elite warrior class of females called the Female Furies on Apocalypse. Think of them like the Valkyrie in Thor. They would be the equivalent of that on Apocalypse. And she's broken away. She thinks Apocalypse is on the wrong side of things. She's betrayed her Female Fury group, and she's fled to Earth with Mr. Miracle, who Mr. Miracle is also known as Scott Free. Scott Free broke out of prison in Apocalypse and made his way to Earth, and so Big Barda followed him to Earth, and so then Mr. Miracle becomes a book largely about just Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, and then how Scott Free becomes Mr. Miracle. He meets Dr. Thaddeus Brown, who is a stuntman called Mr. Miracle. And I believe he dies in issue 1, Mr. Miracle issue 1, and hands the mantle over, the costume and everything over to Scott Free and his former manager, who's a little person. I don't want to offend anybody, but his little person manager, Oberon, also becomes Scott Free's manager. He dons the costume, starts doing stunts like Dr. Thaddeus Brown. However, Mr. Miracle can go even further than Dr. Thaddeus Brown's stunts, make him look even more real, because one of Scott Free's superpowers is his ability to escape things. I know it's a corny, goofy 70s superpower to have, the ability to escape stuff, but that is his superpower, and I think I like it. It kind of adds to his charm. Once you get to know Mr. Miracle, I consider him one of the baby faces of comics. He's kind of just a goofy, sweet, nice guy. Is just trying to get away from Apocalypse and live his own life. He's not trying to be some famous guy. He just wants to do stunt. He just wants to be a stunt man and love him some Big Barda. Him and Big Barda have a pretty sweet relationship. She's his protector, and all of us older fans, we know Big Barda and Mr. Miracle eventually get married, but at this point in time they're not married yet, and we're seeing their relationship develop. And I really like the character development in Mr. Miracle. I think Mr. Miracle has the best character development in Fourth World. Where I think New Gods has the best plot. I think it has, which, I mean, New Gods is basically the flagship title. Everything else just kind of works into New Gods. New Gods being the best story. I still think the best character development goes to Mr. Miracle. I'm really, I'm just really interested in the character development of, again, Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. And then we come to the Forever People. They're a group of 5 people from New Genesis, and they found their way to Earth. And I think they're on the run from Apocalypse, but they're also helping to fight the forces of Apocalypse as well. I also believe one of the members of the Forever People has the anti-life equation. And I didn't say this in the synopsis, and I should have. But a lot of the premise of Fourth World is Darkseid has come to Earth in search of the anti-life equation. If he can figure out the anti-life equation, he can control humanity with his thoughts. I believe that's how it works. And that will give him the advantage in the fight against New Genesis, which is the overarching plot. And so that's about as far as I've gotten. We've seen Mr. Miracle and Big Barda and the Forever People and Jimmy Olsen. They're all fighting sort of Darkseid's goons. Darkseid, one of his biggest goons, Jeffrey, is like a minister, and he's been preaching the religion of Apocalypse, the religion of the anti-life equation on Earth, spreading its message. I guess Darkseid's gathering more troops. And then you've also got Makari, who is cloning. He was cloning Jimmy Olsen and making Jimmy Olsen soldiers. I think he was also cloning the Harrys. I'm assuming they haven't tied in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen to anything really. The only connection we have with Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, that book, and the rest of Fourth World so far is the Harrys are from New Genesis, and then the Forever People, I believe, first appeared in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman kind of ran into the Forever People and met them. But that's really the only connectivity between Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen and the rest of Fourth World. But yeah, Mr. Miracle, not only is he currently fighting goons, like I think he even fights Makari, he also fights a German colonel. Oh my god, I forget his name. Wunderbar, Captain Wunderbar or something like that. Very German, Northern European style, like old world military general villain. And Mr. Miracle's defeated him, I believe. We've also got Morgan Edge, who's okay. That's some more connectivity. That's coming to my brain. Morgan Edge is featured in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. He's taken over Perry White's job at the Daily Planet, I believe, and he's monitoring Clark Kent. I can't remember if he's put together Clark Kent as Superman yet, but he is monitoring Clark Kent. And he's the leader of Intergang, who are an organization from Apocalypse, I believe. Or maybe they're an Earth gang given apocalyptian tech, which segue into some speculation here. That is the same Intergang that is featured in Black Adam, and the tech they are using is from Apocalypse. So Black Adam, the movie, is already setting up for potentially a Fourth World movie, which would be cool. That should be the first event, is Fourth World, and then I think we should move into Crisis on Infinite Earths. Alright, pause that. We'll get back to Fourth World. So yeah, Morgan Edge is working for Darkseid. He answers directly to Darkseid. He's working at the Daily Planet doing his evil stuff. And then New Gods is carrying the main title. It's largely centered around Orion and what Orion's doing to fight Apocalypse. And at the halfway point, we're getting close. I think Orion is getting ready to go back to Apocalypse to fight Darkseid. And then at the end of the last Mr. Miracle issue I read, I'm pretty sure Mr. Miracle is going to go back to Apocalypse to fight on Apocalypse. And I think Orion and Mr. Miracle are going to meet either in New Gods or Mr. Miracle, one of those books, and we're going to get the backstory, the origin, in the first time they meet, which is going to be a great issue. I'm getting really close to that issue, and I'm so excited to finally read the origin for myself and know it firsthand, not just from Comic Vine or Wikipedia. But yeah, that's coming up soon. That's not something I've read yet. And then the Forever People, they're just kind of doing their thing on Earth. It's the most campy. Forever People seems to be the most campy of the Fourth World books. I like Big Bear. Big Bear's the big, hairy guy. If you look up like Forever People -- 1, the really big, husky, like hairy dude is Big Bear. I forget all their superpowers, but there's a cowboy. There's I think Black Racer is in New Gods. There's Big Bear, there's a cowboy, there's Beautiful Dreamer. Her superpower, when Beautiful Dreamer goes into a state of coma, like a state of sleep, she dreams, and I forget her superpower, but it activates her superpower. And then there's two more. There's 5 Forever People, I believe. It's just really campy, and a lot of what I'm reading right now, Darkseid. I can't believe this is an actual plot. Darkseid has, I think, Desaad and Darkseid. They're inside of a carnival on Earth. The Forever People have tracked down this carnival, and they've uncovered the fact that it's like an apocalyptic base, and they blew up the carnival, and so Darkseid's forced to evacuate the carnival, his base of operations, and he's got to go regroup. Every opportunity he's tried to seize with his goons, the Colonel Thunderbar, or whatever his name is, and Makari, and the DNA aliens with Makari, and there's a couple other villains I'm trying to remember. It's just anyway. So yeah, they're doing their thing, and that's really where I'm at the halfway point. I hope I explained it enough for you to kind of follow where I'm going. Everybody's kind of making their way to Earth, and they're defeating Darkseid's goons, while Darkseid's trying to find who's got the anti-life equation. So that's really where we're at. So my favorite book, again, is New Gods. I love the epic poetry-like storytelling in New Gods. Jack Kirby really had a good idea, and I hope to one day collect New Gods in single issue. That'll be fun. My least favorite book, definitely, I'm not a big fan of Forever People. It's just really campy. However, I still like it a little bit. It does have some redeeming qualities. I still like it a little better than the Superman's pal, Jamie Olsen. That book doesn't even have to be in Fourth World. It's almost completely separate. And then the Newsboy Legion, I don't find them particularly interesting. They're like a bunch of 1940s paperboy looking teenagers. And each issue is pretty much self-contained, and I don't find them interesting. Like, one of the issues that does kind of cross over, the Newsboy Legion and Superman's, or Jimmy Olsen and Superman, they go into the cloning plant where Makari is, and they defeat a bunch of clones of Jimmy Olsen, and it's just really bizarre, because, like, even though, like, it's just hard to put on the glasses of the 1970s glasses and get my head into the headspace of what people were reading back then, because each issue feels self-contained. It feels like they wrap up every single question I have in every issue of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. It doesn't feel like there's any connectivity, there's any strands of storytelling that leak into the next issue. Versus today, in a post Brian Michael Bendis era, where we've decompressed storytelling and we stretch out stories over issues and issues. We can have we see story arcs go for a whole year now. That's very commonplace in today's storytelling. But back then, in the 70s, it was completely different. Every comic book was its own contained adventure, and there's a lot of that writing in, especially in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and it just makes it hard to follow along. That kind of self-contained, each issue is its own adventure, is across the entire story. But I do feel like New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and Forever People do a better job of leading me somewhere. I can tell it's going somewhere. If I grew up in this, if I was a fan of older comics, older storytelling, and I didn't know Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen was connected to Fourth World inside the Fourth World story, I might not have a problem with it. But because it's in an omnibus and I'm expecting it to go somewhere, I think maybe that hurts the story. I'm not sure. And then my point of view of, my first comics were from 2013, not from 1970. So that is potentially hurting Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen as well. It's some of the most boring, hard comics I've ever had to get through, and it's really putting into perspective how much I really like Bronze Age, Silver Age, and Gold Age storytelling. Not sure I'm a fan of it, but we'll have to see. We're only at the halfway point. Do I love Fourth World so far? I love the premise of Fourth World. I think it's fantastic. I kind of like the art sometimes, and I kind of don't sometimes. Jack Kirby's kind of hit or miss, which is understandable because of his output rate, his ability to produce a comic book so quickly. I feel like his art, although extremely consistent for his output rate, I still feel is a little inconsistent at times. And it kind of takes me out of the book, and I end up noticing how inconsistent the art is, or how it could have been done a little better, instead of focusing on the story. So that's another thing that makes it hard to comprehend, is I'm focusing on things that don't necessarily matter to the story. Overall, I still like this book. The further I get into the story, the more interested I become, and I'm actually really fired up to get to the next issue of New Gods or Mr. Miracle and read that Mr. Miracle and Orion backstory. I'm really fired up to read that. And then I'm really hoping the last 300, 400 issues of New Gods, as I can get through the midway point, become really interesting to read. Once I get past page 1,000, as we tie up Fourth World. And I hope the story's complete. I've seemed to have it in my head that I've heard somewhere that Fourth World is a little incomplete. And it's never been done right since. John Byrne did Fourth World Volume 2 essentially in the 90s, and I've heard that it just doesn't measure up, which it's hard to measure up to Jack Kirby. But I am hoping this singular story is, in fact, complete, and there's no major loose ends at the end. So that'll do me there. That is the halfway point check-in. I'm not loving the story, but I'm interested. I like it. That's just about where I'm at. I feel a little let down. I'll be honest there. I had such high hopes for the story, and that it was going to be so epic, and it was all going to just tie in. And I think I'm spoiled. I read Sandman before I read Fourth World, and Sandman is another one of those long, epic storytelling books that I kind of expected Fourth World to be as good as that, and it's just from another time. I'm trying to be nice to Fourth World. I respect Jack Kirby and his legacy. He is the king, in my opinion. In terms of output rate, nobody can put out comics like Jack Kirby. I love the imagery. I love the basic concept of Fourth World, but each issue, I'm not sure I like it that much. It just getting into the details of Fourth World is where I find Jack Kirby put a lot of filler in and a lot of stuff that didn't have to be there. He could have condensed the story down a lot. But again, it's from another time. It's from the 70s, and I think Fourth World, in my opinion, kicked off the Bronze Age for DC. If not Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing had a lot to do with kicking off the Bronze Age as well. I'm going to finish Fourth World. I hope to finish Fourth World a lot sooner rather than later. And I hope at the end of Fourth World, it'll all tie in, it'll all make sense, and I will have a greater appreciation for Fourth World than I do right now. Hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time.